Listen to that sound. That is the sound of history being chipped out of the dark. For nearly 60 years, this stone face was hidden behind a wall. In 1966, the original bas-relief was quietly removed to build a transfer passage. The state wanted it gone. The official story was that the past needed to be paved over. But in the spring of 2025, the wall came down. On May 15th, a full-length copy of this bas-relief was unveiled as a gift to passengers for the metro's 90th anniversary.
Все просили меня обратиться к вам, Владимир, и поддержать предложение о переименовании аэропорта и дать ему настоящее, гордое, мужественное, героическое название – аэропорт Сталинград.
Just weeks earlier, on April 29th, a presidential decree officially changed the name of the Volgograd International Airport back to Stalingrad. These are not just nostalgic gestures. They are not mere historical restorations. They are calculated, strategic signals broadcasted on a global frequency. Why is the Russian state actively bringing back the most polarizing figure of the 20th century right now? What does the return of the Man of Steel tell us about how Russia plans to survive the next decade? And more importantly, what message is this sending to the rest of the world? To understand the return, we have to understand the absence. For 30 years after the Soviet collapse, the official post-Soviet narrative kept Joseph Stalin at a very careful distance. The state celebrated the 1945 victory over Nazi Germany, but it distanced itself from the methods used to achieve it. It tried to integrate with the West. It tried to adopt Western liberal narratives. But in 2025 and 2026, that distance collapsed. The integration project failed. Sanctions became permanent. The Kremlin realized that to survive a prolonged Cold War 2.0, it needed a deeper, more resilient foundation than just the memory of 1945. It needed the entire architecture of Soviet industrialization. It needed the architect himself. Let's look at the material reality of the 1920s and 30s. To truly understand this rehabilitation, we have to change the scale of our observation. Some analysts, but also common people in Russia, point out in their commentaries, to judge Stalin by his actions, one must think on a grand scale. No matter who tries to examine his actions, they always view him through a narrow lens. Moreover, those who attempt to judge him by his actions are often people who know nothing at all about history or economics. They are, so to speak, mainly professional windbags who are smearing him with mud. Think about the actual conditions of that specific historical moment. How could order be restored in a country where a civil war had just ended? In a country where people were accustomed to resorting to violence, even in everyday disputes? How could one rely on the old intelligentsia, on people who knew only how to undermine the state system and switch from one faction to another? And when you look at the economic debates of that era, the questions multiply. How much had the modern private farmers of the 1920s actually done for the countryside compared to the days of the newly formed kolkhozes and sovkhozes? The private farms were chaotic and localized. The collective farms fed the cities and built the industrial base. The choice wasn't abstract. It was a brutal necessity for survival. It is hard to judge a historical figure if they're like a massive rock, and you're standing at its base like an ant. You only see the texture of the stone right in front of your face. You miss the sheer mass of the thing. You miss what it holds up. When you step back and look at the whole rock, the data is staggering. Under Stalin's leadership, literacy rates in the USSR rose from approximately 28% to 100%. Life expectancy increased from 32 to 63 years. He took a backwards peasant country and industrialized it in a single decade, entirely without Western loans. And the West knew exactly what was happening. Even the Central Intelligence Agency, in a 1972 internal memo, acknowledged that Stalin succeeded in establishing an almost absolute dictatorship. The CIA distinguished his power from the more collective leadership of his successors. They recognized that this was a unique concentration of power designed for one specific purpose: total state mobilization. But here is where the narrative gets complicated. The year 1936, the adoption of the Stalin Constitution. On paper, it was touted as the most democratic constitution in the world. Yet, it coincided exactly with the Great Terror. How do you reconcile a socialist democracy with mass repression? Some analysts offer a fascinating perspective. They argue that Stalin's purges were not just random terror, but populist moves intended to crush unaccountable local elites. The Stalinist efficiency we see referenced today is about the accountability of officials. The rhetoric of making bureaucrats answer with their heads is a direct appeal to a populace frustrated by corruption and inefficiency. This is the deeper system at play. The modern Russian state is facing a massive, complex war economy. They need a bureaucracy that executes orders without hesitation. By reviving the memory of a leader who bypassed local elites and mobilized the masses directly, the Kremlin is signaling a shift toward a much more coercive, highly efficient management of the state. Of course, this shift is not universally accepted. Liberal activists and opposition groups, like the Yabloko Party, denounce these restorations as normalizing Stalinism. They call it spitting in the face of repression victims. At the new Metro monument, activists have placed wreaths for the victims and quoted past condemnations of the repressions. But notice how the state handles this. They allow the small-scale protests. They allow the 1,456 signatures on the petition. Why? Because it maintains a veneer of pluralism. It acts as a safety valve. Meanwhile, the state proceeds with the major symbolic shifts. The victim-centric history is allowed to exist in the margins, but the victory-centric history is given the center of the metro station. And this brings us to the most crucial point. What most Western observers completely miss is the target audience. They look at these monuments and see authoritarian nostalgia for domestic consumption. They miss the geopolitical broadcast. This rehabilitation is a direct message to the global South. For decades, the West has told developing nations that to achieve modernity, you must adopt Western liberal democratic standards. You must open your markets. You must integrate. The return of Stalinist symbols shatters that premise. It signals that rapid industrialization, absolute sovereignty, and military victory can be achieved through disciplined, centralized models. This places Russia in line with a broader trend in the global South, that of sovereign history, in which nations actively reject the West's hypocritical narrative on human rights in favor of their own achievements in the field of development. By glorifying the leader who defeated Hitler despite being completely isolated, the Kremlin is preparing its people to face a prolonged period of sanctions. This marks the definitive consolidation of the Fortress Russia concept. The message to the global South is clear. We survived total isolation, and we won. You can do it too. There is a quote attributed to Stalin, spoken in his later years, as his health was failing, and his legacy was already being contested by his own inner circle. He reportedly said, "The winds of history would sweep away the rubbish from my grave." For 60 years, the winds blew hard. The rubbish piled up. The wall was built. But in 2025, the wall came down. When you see the name Stalingrad on an international flight schedule, or see tourists taking pictures at the Taganskaya metro station, look past the stone. You're looking at a geopolitical blueprint. The state has concluded that the steel of Stalinist identity is far more valuable for national survival than the thaw of Western integration. The rock is back in the center of the square, and this time, the state is asking the world to look up and take notice. Welcome to Think BRICS Chronicles. This is where the hidden history becomes visible.